Cointelpro was a series of covert, and at times illegal, projects conducted by the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic political organizations. FBI records show that Cointelpro resources targeted groups and individuals that the FBI deemed subversive, including anti-Vietnam War organizers, members of black civil rights and nationalist liberation organizations, feminist organizations, anti-colonial movements, and a variety of organizations that were part of the broader New Left. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover issued directives governing Cointelpro, ordering FBI agents to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, neutralize or otherwise eliminate the activities of these movements and their leaders. Under Hoover, the agent in charge of Cointelpro was William C. Sullivan. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy personally authorized some of these programs. Kennedy would later learn that he also had been a target of FBI surveillance. History. Centralized operations under Cointelpro officially began in August 1956 with a program designed to increase factionalism, cause disruption and win defections inside the Communist Party USA. Tactics included anonymous phone calls, IRS audits, and the creation of documents that would divide American communists internally. An October 1956 memo from Hoover reclassified the FBI's ongoing surveillance of black leaders, including it within Cointelpro, with the justification that the movement was infiltrated by communists. In 1956, Hoover sent an open letter denouncing Drive, T.R.M. Howard, a civil rights leader, surgeon, and wealthy entrepreneur in Mississippi who had criticized FBI inaction in solving recent murders of George W. Lee, Emmett Till, and other blacks in the South. When the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was founded in 1957, the FBI began to monitor and target the group almost immediately, focusing particularly on Bayard Rustin, Stanley Levison, and, eventually, Rev. Martin Luther King, Jr. After the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, Hoover singled out King as a major target for Cointelpro. Under pressure from Hoover to focus on King, Sullivan wrote, "In the light of King's powerful demagogic speech, we must mark him now, if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous Negro of the future in this nation from the standpoint of communism, the Negro, and national security." Soon after, the FBI was systematically bugging King's home and his hotel rooms. In the mid-1960s, King began publicly criticizing the Bureau for giving insufficient attention to the use of terrorism by white supremacists. Hoover responded by publicly calling King the most notorious liar in the United States. In his 1991 memoir, Washington Post journalist Carl Rowan asserted that the FBI had sent at least one anonymous letter to King encouraging him to commit suicide. Historian Taylor Branch documents an anonymous November 21, 1964, suicide package sent by the FBI that contained audio recordings of King's sexual indiscretions combined with a letter telling him that there is only one way out for you. While an FBI spokesman has denied that the FBI was directly involved in Malcolm's murder, it is documented that the Bureau worked to widen the rift between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad that led to Malcolm's assassination. The FBI heavily infiltrated Malcolm's Organization of Afro-American Unity in the final months of his life. The Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of Malcolm X by Manning Marable asserts that most of the men who plotted Malcolm's assassination were never apprehended and that the full extent of the FBI's involvement in his death cannot be known. Amidst the urban unrest of July-August 1967, the FBI began Cointelpro Black Hate which focused on King and the SCLC, as well as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Revolutionary Action Movement, the Deacons for Defense and Justice, Congress of Racial Equality, and the Nation of Islam. Black Hate established the Ghetto Informant Program and instructed 23 FBI officers to disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalist hate-type organizations. A March 1968 memo stated the program's goal was to prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups, to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify the militant black nationalist movement, to pinpoint potential troublemakers and neutralize them before they exercise their potential for violence against authorities, to prevent militant black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability by discrediting them to both the responsible community and to liberals who have vestiges of sympathy, and to prevent the long-range growth of militant black organizations, especially among youth. Dr. King was said to have potential to be the messiah figure, should he abandon nonviolence and integrationism. Stokely Carmichael was noted to have the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. This program coincided with a broader federal effort to prepare military responses for urban riots, and began increased collaboration between the FBI, Central Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, and the Department of Defense. The CIA launched its own domestic espionage project in 1967 called Operation Chaos. A particular target was the Poor People's Campaign, a national effort organized by King and the SCLC to occupy Washington, D.C. The FBI monitored and disrupted the campaign on a national level, while using targeted smear tactics locally to undermine support for the march. Overall, Cointelpro encompassed disruption and sabotage of the Socialist Workers' Party, the Ku Klux Klan, the Nation of Islam, the Black Panther Party, and the entire New Left social, political movement, which included anti-war, community, and religious groups. A later investigation by the Senate's Church Committee stated that Cointelpro began in 1956, in part because of frustration with Supreme Court rulings limiting the government's power to proceed overtly against dissident groups. Official congressional committees and several court cases have concluded that Cointelpro operations against communist and socialist groups exceeded statutory limits on FBI activity and violated constitutional guarantees of freedom of speech and association. Program exposed. The program was successfully kept secret until 1971, when the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI burgled an FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, took several dossiers, and exposed the program by passing this material to news agencies. Many news organizations initially refused to publish the information. Within the year, Director J. Edgar Hoover declared that the centralized Cointelpro was over, and that all future counterintelligence operations would be handled on a case-by-case basis. Additional documents were revealed in the course of separate lawsuits filed against the FBI by NBC correspondent Carl Stern, the Socialist Workers' Party, and a number of other groups. In 1976, the Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with Respect to Intelligence Activities of the United States Senate, commonly referred to as the Church Committee for its chairman, Senator Frank Church of Idaho, launched a major investigation of the FBI and Cointelpro. Journalists and historians speculate that the government has not released many dossiers and documents related to the program. Many released documents have been partly, or entirely, redacted. The final report of the Select Committee castigated conduct of the intelligence community in its domestic operations in no uncertain terms. The committee finds that the domestic activities of the intelligence community at times violated specific statutory prohibitions and infringed the constitutional rights of American citizens. The legal questions involved in intelligence programs were often not considered, while intelligence officers on occasion failed to disclose to their superiors programs which were illegal or of questionable legality. The committee finds that the most serious breaches of duty were those of senior officials, who were responsible for controlling intelligence activities and generally failed to assure compliance with the law. Many of the techniques used would be intolerable in a democratic society, even if all of the targets had been involved in violent activity. But Cointelpro went far beyond that. The Bureau conducted a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association, on the theory that preventing the growth of dangerous groups and the propagation of dangerous ideas would protect the national security and deter violence. Range of targets. At its inception, the program's main target was the Communist Party, according to the Church Committee, while the declared purposes of these programs were to protect the national security or prevent violence. Bureau witnesses admit that many of the targets were non-violent and most had no connections with a foreign power. Indeed, non-violent organizations and individuals were targeted because the Bureau believed they represented a potential for violence, and non-violent citizens who were against the war in Vietnam were targeted because they gave aid and comfort to violent demonstrators by lending respectability to their cause. The imprecision of the targeting is demonstrated by the inability of the Bureau to define the subjects of the programs. The Black Nationalist Program, according to its supervisor, included a great number of organizations that you might not today characterize as black nationalist but which were in fact primarily black. Thus, the Nonviolent Southern Christian Leadership Conference was labeled as a black nationalist hate group. Furthermore, the actual targets were chosen from a far broader group than the titles of the programs would imply. The CPUSA program targeted not only Communist Party members but also sponsors of the National Committee to Abolish the House Un-American Activities Committee and civil rights leaders allegedly under communist influence or deemed to be not sufficiently anti-communist. The Socialist Workers' Party program included non-SWP sponsors of anti-war demonstrations which were co-sponsored by the SWP or the Young Socialist Alliance, its youth group. The Black Nationalist Program targeted a range of organizations from the Panthers to SNCC to the Peaceful Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and included every black student union and many other black student groups. New Left targets ranged from the SDS to the Inter-University Committee for Debate on Foreign Policy, from Antioch College to the New Mexico Free University and other alternate schools, and from underground newspapers to students protesting university censorship of a student publication by carrying signs with four-letter words on them. Examples of surveillance, spanning all presidents from FDR to Nixon, both legal and illegal, contained in the Church Committee report. President Roosevelt asked the FBI to put in its files the names of citizens sending telegrams to the White House opposing his national defense policy and supporting Col. Charles Lindbergh. President Truman received inside information on a former Roosevelt aide's efforts to influence his appointments, labor union negotiating plans, and the publishing plans of journalists. President Eisenhower received reports on purely political and social contacts with foreign officials by Bernard Baruch, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas. The Kennedy administration had the FBI wiretap a congressional staff member, 3 executive officials, a lobbyist, and a Washington law firm. U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy received the fruits of an FBI wiretap on Martin Luther King, Jr., and an electronic listening device targeting a congressman, both of which yielded information of a political nature. President Johnson asked the FBI to conduct name checks of his critics and members of the staff of his 1964 opponent, Senator Barry Goldwater. He also requested purely political intelligence on his critics in the Senate, and received extensive intelligence reports on political activity at the 1964 Democratic Convention from FBI electronic surveillance. President Nixon authorized a program of wiretaps which produce for the White House purely political or personal information unrelated to national security, including information about a Supreme Court justice, groups that were known to be targets of Cointelpro operations include communist and socialist organizations, organizations and individuals associated with the civil rights movement, including Rev. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and others associated with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Congress of Racial Equality, and other civil rights organizations, Black nationalist groups, the Young Lords, the American Indian Movement, the white supremacist groups, the Ku Klux Klan, the National States' Rights Party, a broad range of organizations labeled New Left, including Students for a Democratic Society and the Weathermen, almost all groups protesting the Vietnam War, as well as individual student demonstrators with no group affiliation, the National Lawyers Guild, organizations and individuals associated with the women's rights movement, nationalist groups such as those seeking independence for Puerto Rico, United Ireland, and Cuban exile movements including Orlando Bosque's Cuban Power and the Cuban Nationalist Movement, and additional notable Americans. The Cointelpro documents show numerous cases of the FBI's intentions to prevent and disrupt protests against the Vietnam War. Many techniques were used to accomplish this task. These included promoting splits among anti-war forces, encouraging red baiting of socialists, and pushing violent confrontations as an alternative to massive, peaceful demonstrations. One 1966 Cointelpro operation tried to redirect the Socialist Workers' Party from their pledge of support for the anti-war movement